All right. So I want to thank everybody for coming here. Let me just give you a quick rundown on what we're going to do today. In the back, can we get your attention, please? In the back, thank you. So we're going to talk about innovation, and we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and some emerging technologies. We're going to have a very casual conversation. There's no slides. What we want to do is start off with a little bit of an introduction on who we are and our backgrounds and what inspires us. We're then going to move on to talking about some of the challenges in innovation and some of the opportunities. And we're going to talk about emerging technologies. But let me start off with a real quick story as to why we're here. Why should you be interested in this topic? And the story has to do with a fairly large company, did really well, was generating billions in revenue. And within the organization, people started to notice some trends. People started to notice some shifts in the marketplace. But nobody did anything about it because it wasn't their job. Their job was to manage IT, to keep the revenue flowing, support the business model, keep things going. And that company eventually did well for a while, but then they went bankrupt. That company was Blockbuster. Who's heard of Blockbuster? Hands up, right? Everybody. Everybody knows who Blockbuster is. The IT department within Blockbuster did nothing wrong. But they also didn't innovate. They failed to innovate. Because they failed to innovate, 80,000 people lost their jobs. So if you think your company, your healthcare institution, your hospital is doing well, if you think you're doing your job right, but you're ignoring the emerging technologies, not only can you lose your job, you're going to lose everybody's job. We have to innovate. If we're not innovating, we're not going to survive. This is why we're here, because there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of difficulty in thinking about how to bring emerging technologies into a healthcare system. What is artificial intelligence? What is blockchain? How do we bring these new technologies into the healthcare system? How do we consider the impact and disruption that they may have? So that's the point of this panel. My name is Spyro Mousses. As you heard, I'm Chief Scientific Officer for the Medical Intelligence and Innovation Institute. We have an esteemed group of panelists here. We're going to take 5 minutes each to tell you a little bit about our background and what inspires us and why we're here. And then we're going to talk about the challenges. So let me start with Dr. Anthony Chang. Please introduce yourself and tell us what inspires you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to thank HIMSS and Sam and Scott and Chuck for inviting me back. I had a really amazing day here last year. As some of you remember, I gave a talk on the evolution of artificial intelligence in the healthcare system. I'm a pediatric cardiologist and intensivist. I still have a pretty busy outpatient practice. I'm trying to straddle between my clinical practice as well as the IT, artificial intelligence world in a hospital. I give talks on AI in healthcare quite often these days. I just got back from China last week. And if you think one country that's really embracing AI in healthcare, that's China right now. I think the US is also interested, but there were over 500 people in the audience, and then they told me that my talk was streamed to, I thought I had my Mandarin a little bit off because I thought they said 150,000 people, and they said 150,000. I thought they said 15,000, but so that country is really embracing AI in healthcare. And I think the one, you're always looking for takeaways at a senior level meeting like this, and I would think that maybe one takeaway you can have today is looking at your job as not chief information officer in the future, but as Chief Intelligence Officer for a number of reasons. One, the analytics and deep learning in healthcare is on an exponential increase. The AI technology is also on a similar trajectory. And also your job as Chief Information Officer, if you get to know, embrace, and learn about AI, is going to be easier because guess what? AI is going to have to be involved in the information security business as well. You probably heard yesterday, how many people heard that the NSA hackers got hacked? Okay, So now we're officially at war with the bad guys because the bad guys are able to have the entire portfolio of weaponized cybersecurity tools at even the NSA. So, and that's our number one repository of talent in cybersecurity. So you know that we all going to have a very, very difficult job. Humans can no longer do the job of the CIO. You're going to need additional assets, particularly in the analytics and in the AI domain to help your jobs. And I think also it'll make your job, I think, much more interesting and much more gratifying if you just give AI a chance in terms of learning about it and getting to use it to some extent.
Thank you. Eric.
Hi, my name is Eric Just. I lead the clinical analytics and decision support product line at Health Catalyst. We're a data analytics and outcomes improvement company. I've been doing that for 6 years with Health Catalyst, and before that, I was at Northwestern University and I worked on a genomics data project there and transitioned to the data warehouse team where I was one of the lead architects and dabbled in things like text analytics and helping researchers get access to data. And my role at Health Catalyst is now productizing a lot of that stuff and making sure that we can deliver that to healthcare systems large and small across the country. One of the groups that reports through me is the data science team, and we have been building data science and machine learning into our products for some time. I guess when I think about what motivates me, it sure is the outcomes focus. How do we use the technology to make patient care better? That's something that really motivates me. And I think I'm also motivated by the 10-year vision and what we're going to be able to do with self-driving cars and all that automation. But I'm also really motivated by the here and now and understanding and helping people understand what we can do here and now. And AI, machine learning, is not something that's 10 years out. It's a capability that most people have the ability to do right here, right now. And so that's one of the biggest things that gets me out of bed in the morning.
Excellent. So I have a similar background to these gentlemen. I'm passionate about AI and the potential it can have. My background is also in genomics, and I see tremendous potential. You heard earlier today a very nice presentation on precision medicine and how we can personalize care, how we can prevent in a very precise way, predict who's going to get what disease, what are people at risk for. I could tell you as somebody who's looked at whole genomes, it is extraordinarily difficult to interpret these very complex data sets. Even harder to take deep phenotyping, integrate it with deep genotyping, and try to make any sense of it. To Anthony's point, humans can't do it. There's a lot of things that humans are just beyond the human capacity. We recognize this as a team up here. We're here to bring awareness to some of the emerging technologies and have a conversation that will hopefully bring to your awareness, to your consciousness, what's out there so you can look a little bit around the corner and prevent a blockbuster scenario in your industry. All right? So let's start, and this is a suggestion from Eric. It's sometimes nice before a conversation to level set. Let's define some of the key terms that you're hearing and make sure that you hear from us what we think the definition is for these important terms, like artificial intelligence, like machine learning, and make sure that we're on the same level playing field before we actually start our conversation. So let's start with that key definition. I'd love for both of you to answer this question in your own way, because everybody has a slightly different opinion on. And we'll start with Eric. Define artificial intelligence, please.
So artificial intelligence is a very broad term. And you hear it mentioned a lot today in relation to healthcare and Amazon and Google. But it started out in the 1950s, and it conjures up images of C-3PO and Westworld and all these sort of robots that mimic humans and recreate that full range of human intelligence. But when you hear about AI today, usually it's referring to a much narrower definition. So focusing on specific tasks like image recognition or suggestion engines that computers can do as good or better than human beings. You often hear it mentioned in the same breath as machine learning, and I think a lot of people treat them as synonymous. But to me, AI is kind of the broader field, and machine learning is a specific set of algorithms that's really powering AI today. So artificial intelligence is really the umbrella term, and then machine learning is a specific technology that we're using today to create these artificial intelligence scenarios.
Excellent. Anthony, what's a definition for innovation? I mean, you hear that word being thrown a lot. Who's an innovator? What does innovation mean to you?
I think innovation is change that brings value. And it's nothing about bringing technology into solving a problem, but it's basically a change that creates value. It doesn't even necessarily need to involve technology, although with the exponential rise of technology, and I always say this, the next 25 years in medicine will be by far the most interesting and the most productive. And we haven't even really seen what's going to be possible. I would say 90-95% of physicians don't even really see what's coming because they're mired in EHR, they're worried about their job security, they're worried about dictating their 25th note for the evening. They just haven't had a chance to look up and into the future, and it's an amazing future. Ironically, I think the younger generation of medical students actually realize that this is an amazing opportunity if you accommodate technology and things like artificial intelligence into the practice of medicine to make your life easier. And it's not just about saving lives, it's not just about improving outcomes, but it's also about making the physicians' jobs easier. And I think that's the part that a lot of physicians underestimate, the capability of technology. And I'm curious because we're here in a very tech-savvy crowd, and I gave a talk at the American Heart Association this past weekend. So I'm interested in comparing this crowd with a group of cardiologists. So I guess the ice is running low. He's spilling it. Okay. So you've heard of, obviously, autonomous driving cars. I was one of the first to get a Tesla X with the autopilot function. How many people here, by show of hands, would be willing to try to let the autopilot take over in terms of driving aspect only, but not the brake? Totally let go for the driving component. How many people would be willing to let go of both hands and feet in the Tesla? So the steering wheel and the brake. Okay, it's less. How many people will ride in a autonomous driven plane today? So robotics. Okay, so this is about double the number of cardiologists I have in the audience. So I think this is obviously a tech-savvy crowd, so we don't have to sell you artificial intelligence. We just have to convince you that you can bring a healthy ROI into the C-suite when you talk about AI projects. And one of the suggestions I have is start with a small, tangible project. Get a data scientist involved. Some data scientists are really, really looking forward to working with the tech sector in a hospital and clinical material. Even up in the Bay Area, where there's ample supply of data scientists, they're not just considering jobs at Google and Facebook anymore. They're very, very interested in healthcare and making a difference. And as you know, especially the millennials are big about making impact with their job, not just making a salary. So I think it's going to be a very, very exciting couple of decades to come in embracing AI into healthcare, not just for the CIOs, but also for physicians in general.
So staying on the theme of defining innovation, you're in a very unique position because you're both the Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Intelligence Officer in a hospital, in a system where people are looking to you to innovate. So if there's a lot of groups here, they'll say, well, we're innovating. We have people who've invented things. We have researchers who are investigating things. Is that innovation? Is research innovation? Is inventing innovation?
Okay, that's about 4 questions. I think, first of all, I want to give kudos to my partners in all of this, which is our CIO, Chief Information Officer, John Henderson, who you met earlier this morning, and Bill Feaster, our CHIO, who are really critical in terms of providing the data and the information that anyone interested in doing artificial intelligence need. Because that's sort of, if you think of data to intelligence as a pyramid, so data is going to be the foundation that you build the rest of your intelligence continuum on. So without good data in healthcare, it's going to be very, very difficult to do adequate artificial intelligence. So it's data, information, knowledge, and then at the very top of the pyramid is going to be intelligence. So in the future, I think in healthcare, because the data is getting, the volume of data has gotten so big, most of healthcare data was formed in the last 2 to 5 years, probably 2 to 3 years. The medical knowledge is doubling. Does anyone know how fast is medical knowledge doubling? The previous speaker talked about not being able to keep up as a physician. It used to be 3 to 5 years that medical knowledge would, based on publications and information, would double. It is now 3 to 6 months. And by the end of the decade, it will be a few weeks. So there will be no living physician, and I would worry if a physician tells you he or she's keeping up. There's just no way for a physician to keep up in the future. So that's most of your clinicians in the hospital will need your support to come up with new knowledge, new information, and hopefully at some point, intelligence, which is defined as sort of the ultimate level of extracting valuable insight from data that you maintain.
Right. So there's a great myth out there that, hey, we have a research institute, we're innovating. That's just not true. Research is a very important function. It produces knowledge. You intake revenue sources, grants, you take in dollars, and you translate them into knowledge. And that's a terrific, important function. But innovation is a completely collaborative but different entity. Doing innovation requires you to intake what you know, the knowledge, and output, as Anthony rightly said, our definition of knowledge is value. You got to create some positive value somehow. And if you're inventing but you're not implementing and executing on something, you're not putting it into a healthcare system and putting it into practice and generating value, if you're not doing that last mile, you're not innovating, you're inventing, you're doing research, right? So we want to make that very clear in this conversation. Innovation is not research, it's not invention. It goes beyond to actually create value, and that's an important distinction.
And as you know, I'm a convener of people who are interested in innovation in healthcare, but also a convener of people who are interested in artificial intelligence in healthcare. And I used to have these separate groups and separate venues, and I realized from what people are telling me that the two actually are intertwined. It's now in healthcare, because of the technology, with 3D printing and AR, VR. We talked about cybersecurity with blockchain and cloud computing and deep learning and IoT and IoE, which is AI-inspired IoT. These are all elements of innovation in healthcare that's going to require at least a rudimentary knowledge of artificial intelligence. So now we just kind of have everyone meet at the same time in the same place, because it's hard to innovate in healthcare without at least some basic understanding of what's happening in data and data science and artificial intelligence.
So this is a techie group. They probably know what those acronyms are, but let me have you, just for fun, tell everybody what IoT is, what AR and VR are. Go ahead.
Okay, so how many people have heard or know what IoT is? Okay,
Yeah, a lot.
expected everyone. How about
Yeah.
IoE? Okay, so IoE is sort of like IoT 2.0. It's basically IoT now armed. Well, I want to keep talking military terms today, but it's basically IoT devices that will be embedded with artificial intelligence, at least basic artificial intelligence, so the devices will actually make autonomous decisions. And I think what Eric pointed out earlier, a lot of misconceptions about AI is, even the magazines and the journals even, you'll see a face of a robot, or it's not about the robot. So that's the second takeaway today. It's about a new paradigm of using a new type of resource, a new science, to solve problems, not just in healthcare, but obviously, but in everyday life as well. So it's a new paradigm. Andrew Ng, who was my Stanford professor, who taught machine learning, said it's the new electricity. Well, in the hospital, it's basically a new resource that we can solve problems. But it shouldn't be overhyped either. I hear a lot of people sort of saying AI is going to solve all the issues. And I think just like Bill Gates said, we're going to overestimate the AI return the first couple of years, but we'll probably underestimate the AI return for the next 10. So we just need to be patient, I think, and do some projects and see what the return is, and allow data scientists and computer scientists to be your partner in helping to solve some of your issues.
Perfect. Okay, so that's the definitions. We covered artificial intelligence, and Eric nicely distinguished between narrow AI and general AI, right? And most of what we're seeing today is narrow AI, and one of the big questions is how far out is general AI? We'll come back to that one a little bit later because I think it's an important question, and different stakeholders have different opinions, and we want to hear both from the technologist's point of view, but also from the physician point of view. So narrow and strong AI, we covered those. The one thing I'll just throw in there that we didn't talk about yet is cognitive computing, because sometimes that is intermixed with the words machine learning and artificial intelligence. In my opinion, cognitive computing is a separate field. It is encompassed within artificial intelligence and machine learning, but it has a new dimension of knowledge. So not just taking data and finding patterns, but being able to abstract upwards to something that models how the human brain processes information. So biomimicry, using the processes of the human brain to create knowledge systems and applying machine learning to that. It's an emerging field. It's a little bit more specific. So cognitive computing is a subset of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But those are the general terms. And we heard about innovation, distinguish it from research. Let's now start to talk a little bit, and Anthony touched on this a little bit, and I want to expand on this further. How do we get started, right? A lot of you are thinking, okay, I've heard of artificial intelligence. You know, I've seen it in the press. I've seen vendors who are claiming this. I've heard about IBM Watson. I've heard about TensorFlow from Google and so forth. We have some of our analysts are playing with it. You know, how do I really exploit the exponential power of what machine learning can do? Where do you get started? So let me come back to what Anthony talked about. The fuel for this rocket is really data. But it's not just any data. It has to be formatted. It has to be in a state that it could be mined through machine learning. So let me pass it over to Eric to tell us a little bit about what does it take to warehouse data? Do you need a data lake? How do you get started? If you're a healthcare organization, you got EMRs, what do you do next?
The first thing you need is just a repository that combines data from all these different data sources. And the old way was to do a lot of complex data modeling just to get the data into this platform. And I think, there's been a massive realization that you don't need to do that anymore. Data warehousing projects are not as complex as they used to be. And now with the concept of a data lake and late binding architecture, that's what we call our platform, just getting the data integrated into one repository isn't as big of a challenge anymore. But you need to put the data into a place where you can add incremental value to the data. So it was great to see the talk on registries today. So registries is an example of something that I see that you can build on top of your data lakes or your data warehouse. There's incremental value in being able to put all that data together and understand who has a particular condition. Then there's various analyses that you can do. So the old way of building registries, and you still need this, is to use kind of the rules-based approach. But if your data is sitting in a platform where you can then use machine learning to combine lots of different criteria and to gauge a patient's risk, it's a lot trickier than saying, yes, this patient has diabetes, or no, they don't. Are they at risk? It's a lot more factors. And so having your data in a place where you can start to combine all those factors, run algorithms, and do predictive analytics provides another layer of value that you can add onto the data. And I could go on and on and on about all the different ways that you can add value to the data. It's not just access. We're still dogged by issues around data exchange and information blocking and trying to make sure that you can actually do this. You can actually create a comprehensive data source, but there's been lots and lots of progress. I think the good news for organizations that have invested in data and analytics is that AI isn't such a huge leap from what they're doing. They've already got data analysts who know the data in and out. They've got data architects who know how to productionalize data structures and know how to productionalize data processing routines. Add a data scientist and some open source tools. There's a lot of open source tools out there, and you can do a lot of great things without a major new investment. But it all depends on you having made a good investment in data and analytics over the last 5 years, which is where we've seen the market just really go crazy over the last 5 years because we're riding on the back of that EHR requirement in 2008.
Excellent. So the takeaway from those comments that I'm hearing is if you have your house in order and the data is well organized, AI is not such a big deal. There are available tools out there. Let me have you comment a little bit further on that because I want to expand on, there's a lot of CIOs in here who may say, well, okay, I've got a data warehouse. I want to explore the exponential power of AI. And a lot of times, these are autonomous analytics. They're not, you don't pose a model on the data. The data the models emerge from the data. And that's the power of autonomous mining with these machines. But where do I get this software? Is it, do I buy it from IBM? Do I hire somebody to do it? How do I get access to this? Talk to us a little bit about the fundamental difference between open source solutions and commercial solutions and black box versus what you're seeing in terms of what are the trends.
Yeah, so we've seen open source software be able to provide incredible value. As a matter of fact, we have built our machine learning tools on open source technology, and then we've released the tools that we've built as open source. Healthcare.ai is the name of our open source machine learning and healthcare initiative. And so the tools for open source are great, and they provide value, and they're very flexible. You can apply them to all different kinds of data repositories, whether it's a Hadoop data lake or a SQL data warehouse. So I would say open source is a very good place to start for organizations that are looking to get into this. And there are great commercial solutions out there as well. But the nice thing about the open source solutions is the transparency. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about adoption and what it means to get this in workflows and get clinicians to believe in it. But transparency is very key. And my team has needed the flexibility in the open source software to basically not just give the output, but give the context of that output. So not just is this patient at high risk, but what are the factors that are driving that risk? And so if you're looking around for solutions, just make sure that there's enough flexibility to where you can not only deliver the machine learning output, but wrap that context around it as well. That's a really important part of adoption.
Yeah, I think it's ironic when you think about successful implementation of or introduction of AI into a healthcare system like yours. It's actually not about the machine. It's not even about the software. The AI is pretty robust already. The two major hurdles are, one is getting the data in order. So I always draw this analogy of AI in a hospital. It's like having a dinner party. You're not going to have a dinner party unless your house is cleaned up and in order. So the data has to be, we're lucky at Children's Hospital Orange County that John and Bill been able to get our data and EHR into HL7 status. So it's relatively easy to data mine. And so it's about cleaning up your data, getting your data organized. The second hurdle is going to be getting the human champions into the projects. So that's your clinicians who are passionate about making a difference with data science. That's about getting data scientists who are actually going to be helpful in terms of using the software. So it's about getting the data cleaned up and organized, and secondly, about getting the humans involved in the AI projects.
Let's pick up, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I call data science, it's a team sport. And it's one thing to develop the model, and you can have great support, but when it comes to deploying it, you still need the traditional data team. You need your data analyst, you need your data architect, The data scientist plays a critical role, but having those clinicians there is huge. In terms of opportunities for innovation, I think UI is the next big thing. So how do you present it? And we get asked all the time, well, can you put this in the EHR? And that question is kind of loaded, because we can put it in the EHR. But the question is, does the EHR have the flexibility to present it in a way that's actually going to drive improvements? So the ability to innovate UI and incorporate new workflows in the EHRs using technologies like Smart on Fire, you know, the web apps embedded in the EHR is going to be critical, because the workflows that the EHRs have right now, they're only valuable for a limited set of use cases.
I would even argue you want to take a step back from UI and start talking about UX.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing is, I want to reiterate what you just said, having physician involvement is huge, but that's not so easy. So let me ask you, Anthony, right? This is such an important issue. You're an exception, right? So let's not count you, because you're a physician, you're a specialist, but you went back to school, you went to Stanford, and you got a data science degree, so you know what deep learning is. You know what convolutional neural nets are, and all of these terms that are being used in artificial intelligence. You actually know how to code in this. You know how to take an image and use computer vision to extract features. But that's an exception. Most physicians have never heard of deep learning, right? Most physicians don't even know what question to ask of machine learning. So how do you bring them up to speed? How do you bring them into this fold? Because if we're in a time in history where the technological challenges, the data organization, and the machine learning is accessible, open source, commercially available solutions for machine learning, we've got our data in order, but now we have this cultural barrier. How do you cross that cultural barrier?
Well, just like anything else with physicians, I think is the sound down again? As some of you dealt with physicians with EHR implementation, and I think Chuck just dealt with implementation of Epic, you have to earn the physician's respect and trust one by one. And hopefully you get a consortium of physicians that are going to be your champions no matter how good or bad things are going. And I think I'm looking to the next generation of physicians. Right now, I think probably if you were to ask what % of physicians are pretty well versed in data science, it's probably well less than 1%. Physicians are interested in even clinical informatics, probably less than 5%. So those numbers need to go up, I think, by a magnitude for us to really make impact. And it's going to be the next generation of physicians. It's probably not going to be the senior group of physicians really embracing it in a big way. The subspecialists, as you know, are sort of one by one realizing that this new AI paradigm is here and coming. The radiologists are the first ones to realize that this is not just a threat, but a job security issue, which I think is a little bit unfortunate, because the amount of medical images that we're producing every year now is going up 5 to 10-fold every year, and there's plenty of work for people. It's just you have to be knowledgeable and creative about how you can use AI to do your job. And I don't see in the near future any physician losing their jobs. It's just that the physicians have to realize that their jobs need to be reconfigured to accommodate this new source of intellectual energy.
Yep.
And I think radiologists, ICU doctors, ER doctors are sort of the next wave of doctors are going to be either drowning in the tsunami or they're going to try to rise above it. And then cardiologists are not far behind, because we're a very image-intensive subspecialty. So I think hopefully we'll show the physicians as a group that this is going to help with their job burden, not to displace their jobs. And I think once they see that this actually helped their day-to-day routine, and that's the key thing, is whatever you implement, including EHR, right, that you cannot disrupt the patient's and the physician's workflow or productivity. So that's the number one rule if you want to implement AI, is cannot sort of slow down their productivity nor their workflow. So once you can do that, I think they'll start to see the dividends come in, because they'll be able to learn new things as they do their jobs for a change, rather than going to their annual subspecialty meeting to learn something.
Well, let me challenge you to go a little further.
By the way, I
Yeah,
just want to
yeah,
say, when we
yeah.
talk about AI, it's never the AI that's the problem. It's always the AV that's the problem.
Yeah,
It's like a curse.
Let's get
It's like an AI curse.
Let's get Dr. Chang's mic a little bit here. So let me challenge you to go a little bit further, because you're not just an observer here. You're a proponent. I think the Chicago Tribune called you Dr. AI,
No.
and the idea here is you're trying to educate and bring in that next generation. Is not just the young people. It's existing physicians who want to embrace the power of the exponential potential of AI, but they're not sure how. And I think that what they have today is what they know about computer science. They know that the computer is something that gets between them and the patient, right? What they don't realize is that it could be something that is in the background, helping them, not just in decision support, not just in computer vision and picking up things in images and so forth, but as we start to move towards general AI, it could be an advisor, something that amplifies the physician's ability to deliver more precise care, something that can look through 3 billion base pairs in a fraction of a second and say, this patient is at risk for chemotherapy-induced cardiomyopathy, here's the recommended treatment, and advise you in a way that you couldn't possibly do even with the best research. So you're an advocate. Tell us a few things that you're actually doing today to bring physicians up to speed in terms of both education and awareness. What are you doing specifically?
I think one thing that's helpful for all of us is to, and I saw this headline in a newspaper, I was really kind of disappointed. It said, mothers, you should try to convince your children to be data scientists, not physicians or lawyers. And I always wonder why people couldn't do both. If people really want to save lives, they can save lives being a physician and as well have a dual education in data science to help research or improving outcome in a very different way. And I think that's one way, is to really foster interest in the younger generation that life is not always about going into a Silicon Valley big company, and life can be also in healthcare and contributing in that way. I think another way is to slowly educate the physicians and by having meetings and coming to meetings like this. I think I was really enthused last year when I came, and I think we had 30 minutes of questions from the audience here, and I ended up seeing about 24 of you down at the meeting on artificial intelligence and medicine a few weeks later. So I think it's converging everybody, get the doctors and the CIOs, the C-suite executives, the investors, the data scientists and the computer scientists together and form this really robust ecosystem to explore how we can change medicine. And I think everyone wants to change medicine. Very few people, particularly people like this in this room, want to just be status quo and work their way to retirement. Everyone wants to make a difference. So if you want to make a difference, this is your best shot on goal, is to embrace technology and particularly AI in some fashion and really make a difference. So the physicians are probably going to be the most difficult group to convince as a group. But I think physicians also have groupthink. The radiologists, for instance, if you go to the RSNA meeting this year, I think it's happening in a couple of weeks, you'll see that a good number of the abstracts and talks are actually on machine learning for medical images. So they're the first group. Pathologists, dermatologists, ophthalmologists, cardiologists are all going to follow. So I think it's just going to be a matter of time within a decade that just about every subspecialty will be touched by machine learning in a positive way, because we would want a computer to help the radiologist to read our CT when your primary care doctor suspect that you might have cancer, because the error rate is alarmingly high. And the complication rate from the errors in the imaging is also not low. So to really improve outcome and make a difference in our lives, and we're all going to be patients at some point, this is a really important clarion call to make a difference.
Yeah. Also, you're organizing a meeting a month from now. You want to tell us a little bit about that? Because I think we can't do justice to artificial intelligence in medicine in 40 minutes, but tell us about your conference.
So we just want to, I think, as I said, a couple of dozen of you came last year. If you want a sort of a quick 3-day boot camp in learning about artificial intelligence in medicine and healthcare, I'm the chair of a meeting that's coming up. These gentlemen will be there. It's going to be at the Ritz-Carlton in Dana Point, so it's pretty close. It's 66 faculty members from all over the world, and last year we had close to 400. This year we'll probably top 500. So I think the interest level is growing pretty quickly. We have people coming in from China, India, Russia to come to this meeting, and I think it's not just US-centric. It's really going to be, I think, an international movement to just look at medicine in a very different way. You know, there's only so much evidence-based medicine is going to take us, and that's getting outdated, and you still have senior physicians talking about, well, the next NIH-sponsored clinical trial is going to get us the answer. And I, for the American Heart Talk, I posted the controversies that the experts, quote unquote, need to answer. And they, guess what? They were almost identical to the ones that we posted 30, 40 years ago at the American Heart meeting. So clearly, status quo and things remaining the way they are is not going to be enough to satisfy, I think, the patients of the 21st century.
Okay, so that's December?
So December 11th to the 14th.
Okay.
The 11th will be a workshop day where you can learn about machine learning and, if it's possible, in 2 hours, at least know what it is and why people are excited about it. And then the 2.5 days that follow are going to be very short, interactive talks throughout the meeting. I think you'll have a really amazing time also meeting people from all over that are in your sector as well as clinicians. The audience is about 40-45% clinicians, so you'll meet plenty of doctors as well.
Yeah, but there's a good mix of industry and healthcare providers, lots of CIOs, lots of C-suite. Last year was phenomenal. It was very impressive, so thank you for your leadership in that regard.